David, you're usually very methodical and very careful with your stories. Do you think you made a mistake in that drug story? By that I mean, do you think you came public too fast, too soon with it? And you would have been able to expose way more from the FBI if you had held back and held on to the story until you were fully done and you had gotten everything you needed from them. Just out of curiosity. Because I think if we had gotten more out of that, there may have been enough to convince even the worst of his supporters that this guy was bad news.
I guess if there's one, I won't call it a regret, but if there's one thing I'm unhappy about is that perhaps that lawsuit was publicized a bit too soon. Because when we're moving in silence, things were happening. And then as soon as it became public knowledge that we were pursuing that lawsuit, then Tinubu's lawyers applied to be admitted to the lawsuit. And then the FBI started acting funny with us because they had submitted a joint status report saying that they're going to release 500 pages a month to us for the next 5 months. And all of a sudden, they're like, yeah, we never said we're going to release 500 pages a month. We said we would review 500 pages a month. And we never said that we would release everything to you. We have to redact things in the interest of national security, because obviously it's more useful or it's more beneficial to the US government to have someone in power in Nigeria who is pliant to them. That's their primary consideration, not whether he's good for Nigeria or for Africa, but it's whether he's useful to them. And obviously, this is someone who will do anything to remain in power. So he will do absolutely whatever they ask of him, be that good for Africa or not. So, I try not to get too upset about that because at the end of the day, that's still on us. But yeah.
Right.
Hello, everybody. Once again, this is Fred Wanko coming to you from our studios in Chicago with another edition of Bold Talk on Allen TV. And as usual, I like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, depending on where you are around the world. Today, we bring you David Hundeyin. You could more or less say that David Hundeyin is Nigeria's premier investigative journalist. It's a fascinating interview. It tells you what this man goes through to do the things he does for us progressive Nigerians. I know one thing for sure. The powers that be in Nigeria wouldn't like this, but I have to add one group to those powers that be. But I'm sick and tired of bigoted Yoruba people coming to my inbox to talk trash about me being a tribalist. Because in my last video, I presented Lagos as a city that could be one of the greatest cities in the world. But unfortunately, it's been strangle-held by one man, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and has been turned into a white elephant glamour on one side and slums and ghettos on the other side, but more importantly, a city ruled by thugs. None of that is a lie. Bola Ahmed Tinubu is not Yoruba people. I am not the only Nigerian who talks about the ills of Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The focus of this video today, who is a person I idolize, David Hundeyin, is not an Igbo person. He's a Yoruba person, for God's sake. Dele Farotimi is not an Igbo man. Mayegun is not Igbo. Ayo Ademolekun is not Igbo. And I could, Rufai Oseni is not Igbo. Shenwe is not Igbo. These people are objectively talking about the ill effects of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, for God's sake. In Nigeria, a person of one tribe cannot factually talk about the other tribe without being called tribalistic. As a matter of fact, there are more credible Yoruba journalists and scholars that are talking about the ill effects of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, not just on Nigeria, but especially on the greatness and the tainting of the greatness of the people called Yorubas. That I talk about one criminal who happens to be a Yoruba person doesn't mean I'm talking about Yoruba people. I have Yoruba friends all across, everywhere. But I have to be honest with you. If any of my Yoruba friends happens to take that bigoted position, they are welcome to go, because I don't give a rat's ass. For me, it's about building the unity of Nigeria. Before I continue to the interview with David Hundeyin, let me tell you what a South African scholar is saying about Nigerians. And then I hope this bigot that inboxed me to talk about me and Yorubas like if he's more Yoruba than I am Igbo. But I'm as Yoruba as he is. That's where I grew up. But it doesn't mean I'll tolerate mediocrity as the leader of Yoruba people. Bola Ahmed Tinubu is bad for Nigeria, but he's worse for Yoruba people. He's dragging down your reputation as a people, because in a tribalistic place, they equate him to Yoruba people. So you should be proud of me, and I should be ashamed of you. Here is what a South African is saying about Nigerians and how Nigeria is hurting because of the policies of people like Bola Ahmed Tinubu and President Buhari. Just listen before I go back to Hundeyin. So, sir, you think that a lot of talent is leaving Nigeria because of policies of the kind of mediocre governments and mediocre leaders we have?
If talent goes where it will be rewarded, it doesn't have to put up with the nonsense. It gets on a plane and it leaves. If you looked at the top 100 investment bankers in Wall Street today, you'd find a healthy percentage of them are Nigerians. The top brain surgeons in the world today, healthy percentage of them Nigerians. The top investment banking lawyers in the world today, healthy percentage of them Nigerians.
So what are you trying to say?
What does that tell you? How is it that Nigeria is struggling with the issues it's struggling with, but some of the smartest people in the world are Nigerians? And then you look at where you'll find those Nigerians, and typically it's not in Nigeria.
So tell me, where do you find these Nigerians?
It means you've got this incredible base of talent whose skills, competence, and abilities are being harvested by another economy and not their economy of birth.
Sir, so when it's all said and done, where is Nigeria headed? Where is Nigeria's economy headed?
So I want to say that if you want to destroy this economy, let the talent leave.
The talent is definitely leaving. The talent is definitely leaving Nigeria. And I ran that little segment as part of my intro to lead you onto David Hundeyin. Because David Hundeyin, the best journalist, the best investigative journalist Nigeria has to offer, has left. He's in exile. Because these monsters will hurt him if he stays in Nigeria. And bigots like that idiot that came to my inbox calling me a tribalist because I talked about Bola Ahmed Tinubu. David Hundeyin is a Yoruba person. That's who the idiot should be defending, not the crook that keeps the David Hundeyins out of Nigeria. But he chooses to stand on the side of crooks. But I'll tell him something. David Hundeyin and Nigerians like him are on the right side of Nigeria's history. It's only a matter of time before we know who is right and who is wrong. Just remind the leaders that there used to be a person called Sonny Abacha. He's gone. And many like him are gone. It's a matter of time. Now, you're going to find, if you already don't know, that David is probably one of the most fascinating journalists, if not the most fascinating investigative journalist that Africa has. The things he does and the way he does it, the things he digs up, are things that Nobel Prize winners are made of. And David, tell us who you are. How did you get into this? How did you become this feared, revered by crooks in Africa? How did you become this feared, revered journalist that you've become?
So I'm a writer and investigative journalist. I'm from Nigeria. My work tends to focus on Nigeria and West African sub-region. And why I guess you described me as fascinating is because I've built a reputation as the guy who goes after the stories that nobody else wants to touch, or the forbidden stories that no one else dares to go after, which I think of as the most important stories that need to be told, especially in the African context. And I've done so at great personal cost and risk, to extents which I guess, even my family thinks I'm a bit crazy. Maybe I am. So that's kind of my thing. That's the portfolio, if you like, that I've built up over the years. I'm going into a bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Sabbatical now, because the platform I built, West Africa Weekly, it's gone through a change in management. I sold a majority stake in the platform, so there are new investors. So there's now a board. We have 7 new reporters on the team. So it's a standalone organization that works without me needing to be there on a day-to-day basis, which I consider to be a success. So there's that. So I'm sort of taking a few months off, I guess, to sort of figure out where to go next and recharge my batteries. But yeah, that's what I've been doing up until this point.
Folks, like I told you up front, this is a parody of Margate's interview with David Hundeyin. So I'm just playing facilitator to bring it to more people who haven't seen it. And what I'll be doing from time to time is asking Margate what she thinks about what's going on. So Margate, now, if you were in David's shoes, what would you do? You could discuss it with David, but what would you do as a journalist, Margate, if you were in David's shoes?
If I were in your shoes, David, I would be I would be like, of course you could never put your pen down. Of course you could never put your computer down, because like you said, your work is having real life result. And what I love the most about what you do and have done so well is put stories in a way that our African people can pay attention to.
But Margaret, when you say these things, you have to break it down for the viewers. I know where you're going with this. Yeah, I know you're going to the elitist manner in which Africans view the media elite relationship. But break it down, and then we'll listen to what David thinks about what you're saying.
See, that's you have a problem, because when you look at how the media is made, especially in Africa, it seems like it's still a media for the elite. So I feel like what happens is at the elite level, they do write about, less mundane things.
I think what you're leading on to here, Margate, is the relationship between even the ordinary people, the press, and the elite. They forget that these elite that they are idolizing are the same ones who are stealing them blind. And they forget that much of this press is just singing praises because they are paid to sing praises of the elite. And in the meantime, the press is not carrying out its real responsibility to the people. Am I right?
I feel like what happens is at the elite level, they do write about, less mundane things. They write about maybe companies, they write about politicians. But like you said, they do it in a way where they're not going to challenge the status quo because they're part of a status quo, right? And then so then you have that type of media going on at the elite level. And then and the way that media is done, the masses don't really see themselves in it. They don't really,
Exactly.
because you have a level of education, the way the masses think, what excites them doesn't excite them. It's just not right that. So there is
Precisely. So
they don't pay attention to that. And what they pay attention to at the lower level is maybe more TikTok. And now
that's
that we
it.
have TikTok, who knows? And there it's all nonsense. It's all stupid stuff that doesn't make anybody move forward. We're not talking
Yep.
about the real problems, or when we talk about it, it's done in a way that's really not very sophisticated. Bottom
Yep.
line is we're not moving forward.
Okay, Margate, what would you consider is the essence of David? What's the magic of David? Since I can't get across to David directly, could you ask him a question to that effect? What's the magic of David? My listeners would like to know.
So what you have accomplished is this ability to talk about things that truly matter for the masses, but do it in a way that makes them really want to pay attention. And you also help them understand things that otherwise they would not have understood. And that to me is the magic of David, and it's not something that we see outside of, I think except for you, I don't know if we have other journalists who write like you. I mean, if you know them, you can tell me because I know you're very good about, being your own critique. But I think
Yeah.
for me, if you ask me what is the magic of David, that's what I would say. And we need people like you so badly. So then keep going.
Okay, Margaret, since I think David can hear me, even though he can't see me like he can see you. David, freedom of press in Africa is becoming like just a figure of speech. It doesn't mean anything. I'm not sure Nigerian leaders were ready for somebody like you. And that's why they are so threatened by the excellent work you do to bring out the evils in them. What's your recollection of this witch hunt? When can you pinpoint and say that it dawned on you that they are noticing your work and that the witch hunt may start and you need to start planning how to get the blank out of that country?
I mean, I remember the very first time that I had a run in with the state, it was actually a family member. Remember, I said I come from an establishment family. The very first person to threaten was a family member. So this was in 20, so this was actually in 2019. This was even before I went into investigative journalism, when I was still a columnist. But because of the sheer ferocity, I guess, with which I wrote, people had started to take notice. And it was September 2019. I'd gone to Badagry, which is my hometown, for a holiday, for a public holiday. Because how it used to work is that whenever there's a general holiday, everyone comes home to celebrate with family. And this fellow, whose name I won't mention, but he's a very well-known person in Nigeria. He used to be a director general of a major public agency. He had never spoken to me before, but he looked out for me. So he came with his full official convoy with the bike riders in front and the sirens and everything. And he came especially to look for me. And he said it with a smile on his face, but you could tell that he meant it. And he said that people in Abuja, that they've been talking to me, that we've been seeing all the things you've been writing. You've been writing a lot of things, and we've been seeing that. And then he touched the glasses on my face. He said, "Have you ever been to the DSS headquarters in Abuja?" So the DSS is like the Nigerian secret police,
Yeah.
right? Have you ever been to the DSS headquarters in Abuja? Do you know that they have 7 stories of underground cells? And that with these your glasses, you're not going to see anything in there by the time you.
David, were you scared? You must have been scared out of your pants.
I was surprised because I'd never spoken to this geezer before. And that's the very first thing he ever said to me in my life. Like, this is my uncle.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my first ever sort of warning that you are being noticed and not in a good way. So in January 2020, I had a run in. This time it was the private entity. It was a bank. So there was a story that I did about them. So to put this in context, I think their Christmas party, they invited like big artists, Wizkid, whatnot. They paid millions to make it happen. And then like a few days after, like the start of the new year, they let a bunch of staff go. But the way they did it was the story because they didn't properly make them redundant. They basically just fired a bunch of people, didn't pay them their severance benefits. So people just came into the office and their systems weren't able to log in, and that was that. About 2,000 people. And the reason given was cost-cutting measures, yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, like a few days before, here you are partying in all white and red with Wizkid and whatnot. So what's going on? So I did a story about it. I didn't think that was going to be a big story or anything, but apparently the bank took it really personal that who is leaking information to a journalist, because there was obviously information on the story that showed that, first of all, this bank was not in any kind of financial difficulty. I mean, if you're paying this kind of money to host a party and then you're refusing to pay severance benefits to your employees simply because you expect that they're going to be too powerless to do anything about it, there's no reason for you not to pay them their agreed severance benefits, which are in their contracts, and you just refuse to pay them. Like, you can always fire employees. That's fine. No one says you shouldn't fire them, but it's in the contract that you have to give them so and so amount of severance if you're letting them go. If you're making them redundant, you're not doing that. You're making them redundant, but you're not paying the redundancy. And apparently the bank got really angry that I had access to this information, and all sorts of crazy things started to happen. And then I got a call one day from a guy who apparently used to be a journalist, who now works in the corporate comms department of this bank, who said that the CEO, whose name I don't want to mention, he's a dollar billionaire, so you may know who I'm talking about. CEO wants to meet you at Alliance Francaise in Ikoyi, and this was like night, like 8 p.m. CEO wants to meet you, yada, yada, yada. I'm thinking, why does a billionaire CEO of a bank want to meet with me? Because I wrote a story about his bank. Like, I just wrote a story. Why is that such a big deal? And I called my editor, and she warned me not to go for that meeting. And apparently, it turns out that this guy has a habit of whenever a journalist or whoever writes something about him that he doesn't like or about his business, he gets them locked up. So what my editor said was, if you had gone to that meeting, there'd have been police waiting for you there, and you'd have spent a month at Kirikiri. So Kirikiri is like a maximum security prison in Lagos. It's like the most notorious prison in Nigeria. She said you'd have spent a month there. You wouldn't have died. You'd have been fine eventually, but you'd have spent a month in there just to teach you a lesson. Apparently, that's what he does to journalists or bloggers who write anything about him that he doesn't like. He just keeps them for 1 month in Kirikiri. There's no charge. You're not charged with any offense. You're not taken to the police station, nothing. They just lock you up in there for a month. And after a month, you come. So that actually really spooked me. That really spooked me, actually. I remember when that happened, I was so spooked, I actually bought a ticket to Dubai. Like, I left the country for a few weeks, like, because I didn't know. Because then I got a call from someone else whose name I'm not going to mention. He's a security consultant. And he said, I hope you're not planning to sleep in your house this night.
Wow.
I'm like, what? And it's like, he's been hearing a few things that he don't sleep in your house this night. And that was like, I'd never run into that kind of experience before. This was bear in mind, I was completely new to all of this. I was completely green. I had no training. I was just sort of figuring all of this out, that this is how the Nigerian system works. And this is how it deals with people who sort of stick their head up above the parapet.
Yep.
So fortunately, this wasn't like, it wasn't my day job. It was pretty much a passion project. I was running my copywriting agency at the time. So I had a bit of disposable income and whatnot. So I literally bought a ticket Emirates ticket to Dubai, and I stayed there for like 2 weeks, just to sort of wait for things to sort of calm down a bit. And then when it seemed like it had blown over, and maybe no one was looking for me anymore, then I sort of crept back into Nigeria. And I continued doing what I was doing. So then COVID hit.
Okay, David, we get the gist. However, inquiring minds want to know. My listeners can't wait. What story would you say was the story that really, really brought you to the limelight? Not the near limelight, but just started the explosion of the man David has become.
There are a few stories I did. The story that I guess elevated me from being a nuisance to being properly notorious in the eyes of the government was in May 2020. Under the guise of response measures to COVID-19, the government was trying to push through this bill called the Infectious Diseases Act. Now, the thing with this act was that on the surface, it looks like it's an act to, to give the NCDC more powers. The NCDC is the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, which seems nice and innocuous, right? However, what this bill actually was, they had smuggled a bunch of clauses into it. So they had smuggled clauses to basically end freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of political, they had basically smuggled in a bunch of clauses and then made the health minister essentially an unaccountable dictator. Because one of the clauses, I think probably the worst clause in the bill was that regardless of what happens, no one has you don't have recourse to sue the health minister, basically. Yeah. So basically, the health minister is literally above the law. You're not allowed to sue him, regardless of what the provisions of this bill may result in your personal life. So so one of the clauses in the bill was that the police have the right to detain you without warrant, to arrest without warrant, or to stop any gathering if they suspect that this gathering or that you may be somehow facilitating the spread of an infectious disease or that you have an infectious disease. Which means in practice that if, for example, you have a common cold, you can be arrested for spreading an infectious disease without warrant. Mm-hmm. It's a ridiculous clause, and it's there. It's just open-ended, and you are not allowed to sue if your rights are breached in that manner, because this is unconstitutional. The Nigerian Constitution states that everyone will have freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of association. Those are basic baked-in rights according to the 1999 Constitution, and this is a clearly unconstitutional bill being sneaked into law. And then perhaps more farcically, it then turned out, because I actually used a plagiarism detector on the bill, it turned out that 97% of the bill was basically facsimiled from a 1978 bill passed in Singapore. So they basically took a bill from Singapore and then used Control G to remove the word Singapore and replace it with Nigeria, and presented it to the Nigerian House of Representatives as legislation, very potentially hurtful legislation. So I was able to get hold of this bill before it passed, because in Nigeria, a bill has to pass through three readings in the House before it goes to the president. It had passed through the second reading. It was going to get to the third reading the very next day. I got it the night before. And just as a quick aside, that's one of the issues that later became a problem. The fact that in Nigeria, unlike in most places that call themselves democracies, there is no system to know what is being considered in your House of Parliament or your House of Senate or whatever. So there's no website you can go to find out what bill is being considered. Nothing. You need to basically have a friend who is there, who is going to send you like a PDF copy of the bill. And when I say it's not a proper PDF, someone like literally took pictures of the bill with their phone and then like used cam scanner and then sent it via PDF on WhatsApp. That's how I got the bill, right? So then I stayed up all night and I did a review of the bill and I published it the very morning it was supposed to pass. And it raised such a stink that the bill was later thrown out and it didn't pass. And for that, I won the People Journalism Prize for Africa 2020. However, for that, I also came to the notice of the government, like front and center for the first time, that this guy is a troublemaker. This guy, someday, not even someday, in the near future, this guy is going to need to be taken care of. right? Because he's gone from merely being someone who is, calling out, bad hospitals and whatnot, and now he's actually affecting national policy. So something needs to be done about this kid.
Okay, now, David, fast forward, NSARS. You were not directly involved in NSARS, but I know that soon after NSARS, you left the country. Why was that? Did you think they were going to somehow implicate you in NSARS? Tell us a little about it.
October 2020, which was when the nationwide protest happened, the NSARS protest, I actually left the country in November 2020 because at the end of the protest, the so-called Lekki massacre that ended the protest, I was able to get my hands on some information that basically implicated the government in the massacre. And I knew that once I published this story and I'm still in the country, they're definitely going to arrest me because they're going to want to know who my source was. And they've been looking for a reason to arrest me already. This is going to be it. So I left the country. So I moved to Ghana. I didn't realize that this was going to become a permanent thing. I didn't know at the time. Again, I was figuring this out as I went along. I had no frame of reference, nothing. And literally, that's exactly what happened. I was supposed to be out for 3-6 months while I was watching what was going on back home. But then I didn't stop working. I didn't stop doing stories. And the stories started getting even bigger after I left the country. So then in 2021, in April 2021, the former Minister of Communications in Nigeria, who was basically, for lack of a better term, a covert jihadi, I basically exposed him, right? I was able to get recordings of him saying in his own words what he really thought about so many things. I was able to basically piece together his story and put it out there in a way no one had done before. And this was a guy who initially had been planning to run for president. That was what basically destroyed his political aspirations.
But David, there was an even bigger story that happened in either Cross River or Akwa Ibom. I think it was Akwa Ibom. There was a murder, a very dubious but mysterious murder that you got involved in and dug up the details, and they really came after you. I heard that. Do you have the freedom to shed some light on it?
I did a story about a job seeker in Akwa Ibom State who was murdered. Why that was such a big story was that I got leaked data from the telecoms operator, and I was able to use that leaked data to basically piece together the locations of the actors in the story using cell tower geolocation and stuff like that. So I was actually, with all humility, I was basically able to piece together the picture of a murder before the police did so. And that was what got the case, because the state police division was being very funny with the case. But after I did that story, the case was transferred from the state to the federal in Abuja. And the murderer later got a death sentence. But the thing with that story is once I did that, then apparently the Inspector General of Police then decided that this guy is a national security problem. Because apparently by gaining access to telecoms records, which are obviously supposed to be, private, only the law enforcement is supposed to have access to them. But because I had a leak and I was able to use that leak, they then capitalized on that and made it that this guy is a threat to national security, yada, yada, yada. So that was where the problems first began in earnest. By the end of that year, I think I had gone from, if there was a list of maybe top 10 people that the Nigerian government was trying to silence, I was probably maybe at number 5 on that list. And then 2022 was when it really came to a head, because the sacred cows that no one is ever, 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 ever supposed to touch, I came for all of them.
Oh yeah, David, John Toro along, Biko. Who were these sacred cows? You see, The difference between you and I in this quest is that I'm Igbo and you're Yoruba. So when you write things and say things about Tinubu or any Yoruba person, Yorubas may not like you, but they don't like you in the sense that how could you betray your own? He's a fellow Yoruba person. In my case, when I say things about Tinubu, I'm tribalistic. I didn't say anything about Yoruba people. I talked about Tinubu. But in Nigeria, if you're not Yoruba, you can't talk about Yorubas. If you're not Igbo, you can't talk about Igbos. And I say I'm not Yoruba, but I'll talk about Tinubu. Boba de feya, koya, bole dogun, kodogun. So tell me, how did you get into this web where the Tinubu forces want to roast you? Not tell me, tell my audience, tell the viewers.
2022. So I guess the most memorable story from 2022 was a story that I did on the president who is now the president of Nigeria, because I was able to get a hold of legal records in the US showing that this guy was once investigated for heroin trafficking. And he
We're
actually
talking about
forfeited.
Tinubu, right? We're talking about Tinubu
Yes.
now.
Yeah, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. This person actually forfeited $500,000 to the US government, being proceeds of heroin trafficking. This dude is a drug dealer, right? And for, I guess, most of the people who saw that story, that was the first time ever seeing such information about this person. And I guess even for those who had sort of heard about this thing colloquially, because on the streets, his story was actually quite kind of well known. It had long been rumored that this guy made his money in drugs, but no one had really ever been able to prove it. It was just, again, gossip. But I was able to provide the receipts, which I think was a really big thing. And then going beyond that, I then started collaborating with a fellow called Aaron Greenspan, who runs Plainsight.org. And we actually instituted an FOIA lawsuit. So we sued the U.S. Attorney's Office, we sued the FBI, the CIA, the DEA, that's the Drug Enforcement Administration, the IRS, and there was one more, what's it called? State Department. So we sued 6 U.S. government agencies. So far, we're only able to get significant responses from the FBI. So we got about 500 pages worth of responses so far in the 3 months. Actually, no, it's sort of been 3. So about 700 pages worth of responses so far in the 3 months.
David, you're usually very methodical and very careful with your stories. Do you think you made a mistake in that drug story? By that I mean, do you think you came public too fast, too soon with it? And you would have been able to expose way more from the FBI if you had held back and held on to the story until you were fully done and you had gotten everything you needed from them. Just out of curiosity. Because I think if we had gotten more out of that, there may have been enough to convince even the worst of his supporters that this guy was bad news.
I guess if there's one, I won't call it a regret, but if there's one thing I'm unhappy about is that perhaps that lawsuit was publicized a bit too soon. Because when we're moving in silence, things were happening. And then as soon as it became public knowledge that we were pursuing that lawsuit, then Tinubu's lawyers applied to be admitted to the lawsuit. And then the FBI started acting funny with us because they had submitted a joint status report saying that they're going to release 500 pages a month to us for the next 5 months. And all of a sudden, they're like, yeah, we never said we're going to release 500 pages a month. We said we would review 500 pages a month. And we never said that we would release everything to you. We have to redact things in the interest of national security, because obviously it's more useful or it's more beneficial to the US government to have someone in power in Nigeria who is pliant to them. That's their primary consideration, not whether he's good for Nigeria or for Africa, but it's whether he's useful to them. And obviously, this is someone who will do anything to remain in power. So he will do absolutely whatever they ask of him, be that good for Africa or not. So, I try not to get too upset about that because at the end of the day, that's still on us. But yeah.
Right.
thank you so much for the opportunity. But I can't let you go without asking you this. What are your expectations of leadership in Africa, but starting with our home country, Nigeria? What's lacking?
Good governance is not a function of municipal competence. It's not by who keeps trash off the streets, who repair the potholes on the road. Those things are just, they are regular functional things that are not, those are not accomplishments, right? What made Lee Kuan Yew a legendary prime minister in Singapore wasn't that he repaired the roads in Singapore. I mean, he did, obviously, but that wasn't the thing. What the rocket fuel that turned him into a legend was that he essentially revamped the entire business model of Singapore using the powers that he had available to him as a prime minister. He changed their legal system. He changed a lot of things that made Singapore more competitive. It's as simple as that. But that basic nugget of understanding, I don't know how long it's going to take before it sort of permeates into mainstream African political discourse, because it really hasn't got there yet. And a lot of people on the ground still, for whatever reason, think of wealth creation as almost like a crime. Like the way entrepreneurs or hyper successful people are thought of is almost sort of fetishized in a way. People don't really see themselves in that space, that you're a 26-year-old person who has an idea and you can take it somewhere and build a prototype of this idea and demonstrate that it works. Then you can get venture capital to scale this thing, and then you can become a billionaire by 30. Someone born in California can aspire to do that, but because you were born in Kilimani, somehow, your story is different. Somehow you are not allowed to aspire to that. These are the things that I think this media platform of the future, which hopefully I may have some kind of role in midwifing in the future, this media platform should make front and center. I've described it before as a militant pro-capital radio station that needs to, because I think radio is the vehicle of, when I made this statement, I thought of radio as the vehicle of the people, the media channel that reaches the most people in Africa. I don't know if that is still the case, but what I had in mind was a sort of...
I think it is.
Sorry?
Let me take this opportunity to thank the lady who interviewed David Hundeyin in this video, who is Margaret Wade, an excellent journalist from Senegal. I truly appreciate it, and I hope you don't mind me parodying your interview, but I'm sure it creates an audience for you with my audience too. And on behalf of my viewers, I want to continue to thank David Hundeyin for the work he does. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is Fred Nwankwo coming to you from our studios in Chicago with another edition of Bold Talk on Island TV. And until next time, I hope you share a video. I hope you subscribe. Good night and God bless.
Onye mazolo bio akwa nwa zoro bio Max ibia bunye go kwanu mo no fube nazo olaga ni biazugo mmanwu olaga do ni biazugo akwa nwa wilochi o biko rapuzo kona bazia Amakwa mnika gogodia Waligwe kwelo Ike Ijeọma bịara gị. Egwu ka mbụ na-ekene ọmọgọ ndị nsọ Chukwu Emeka Lumo Ikechukwu na-egaji ezi nwanne m ekene dị ịlapụlụ ife niile na-eme wee bịa ka gosili na anyị na gị bụ nwanne Wisdom ga-adị ka nye gị maịkị ka ogobanya bụ egwu isili mmaksi ọ bụ na-etiri egwu a malụkwa malụ n'imego m ife ọjọọ wee sị gị nwanne m ife ọkụ na ịchọlụ na ngeme Wisdom onume ekene gị gbamanwe iyo iyo biko lapụ